that I'm strongly opposed to Sarah Bloom Raskin serving as the vice chair for supervision on the Fed. But that is not the reason that every Republican agreed that it would be premature to vote on her candidacy today. See, the reason for that is because she refuses to answer questions. It was very difficult getting a complete, I don't know if we even now have a complete application from her. There were things dribbling out that should have been presented as a complete package much earlier in this process. But now, she's refused to answer very fundamental questions, especially about a firm called Reserve Trust and her role there. So let me walk through briefly the sequence of events, and I think you'll see why we've got some questions. Reserve Trust is a fintech company. It's based in Colorado. And like many fintech companies, they decided it would be enormously valuable for them to have access to the Federal Reserve's banking, to have direct access to the Federal Reserve payment wires. To get that access, they applied for something that's called a master account. Well, to my knowledge, the Fed has never approved a master account for a fintech company of this nature. And so, unsurprisingly, the Fed turned down the application by Reserve Trust for a master account. Then Sarah Bloom Raskin, who's on the board of Reserve Trust, she had been a Fed governor, and she'd worked in a senior post at Treasury, then she joined the board of Reserve Trust. Well, after the application got turned down, Sarah Bloom Raskin called the president of the Kansas City Fed and lobbied for them to get the account. Now, how do I know that? Well, it's because the president of the Kansas City Fed told me. But Sarah Bloom Raskin hasn't. When asked the question, did you call anyone at the Fed on behalf of Reserve Trust, she seemed to have developed a case of amnesia. Couldn't recall. That's funny. The person who received the call remembered, and the chairman of the board of Reserve Trust knew all about this call, but Sarah Bloom Raskin had no recollection. So what happened next? So they applied for the master account. It's turned down. Sarah Bloom Raskin calls the Fed, and then within months, the Federal Reserve does a 180-degree turn, reverses itself, and approves the transaction. A few months after that, Sarah Bloom Raskin steps down from the board and pockets $1.5 million in stocks that she had been granted. All right. About that sequence of events, I don't think there's anybody that disputes the factual accuracy. What we want to know is, how did this happen? Because now the Reserve Trust is the one fintech in America that I'm aware of that got a master account at the Fed. It's enormously valuable. At least it is to them. You should see the advertising they do about it. They were turned down, and then it was all approved. So I think we have a responsibility to find out, how did that 180-degree reversal by the Fed take place? How was that decision taken? Who made that decision and why? And we've asked for the documents that would substantiate that. An explanation first would be nice, and documents to back it up. We've asked that of Sarah Bloom Raskin. She's told us she doesn't recall whether or why it was important to Reserve Trust to get the master account. That's funny. It seems like it was the most important thing to that company, and she was on their board, and she made the call. But this is the kind of stonewalling we're dealing with. Can't get answers to basic, simple questions. Who'd you talk to? When did you talk to them? What was the nature of the conversation? And from the Fed, what was the review process? What led you to change your conclusion? Do you have a memo from the general counsel laying out the case? By the way, there's lots of applications out there still pending. There's lots of fintech companies that would love to get the master account that Reserve Trust got. If there's a way to do that legally, I think everybody ought to know what it is so that they can decide whether, as a business matter, they want to pursue that. It's pretty hard for anybody to pursue that when they get stonewalled, as we are getting stonewalled. It's pretty rich when I hear some of my colleagues come down here and complain that Republicans didn't show up at the committee today. This is the only recourse we have. When we're getting stonewalled, we can't get an answer to basic questions, which is our responsibility to get answers to these questions. What else can we do? There's nothing else we can do. We offered to vote on the 5 nominees that actually did provide answers to the questions in their applications. But as I said, the chairman preferred to have 0 people advance today rather than have 5. And it's particularly rich when you consider that the chairman himself, just in the last couple of years, urged his Democratic colleagues to boycott a finance committee markup over nominees that he wasn't satisfied with. So, Mr. President, I think this context is important, and I remind my colleagues, Republicans on the Banking Committee, quite happy to vote on 5 nominees, including 4 Fed governors, but we're not willing to vote for Ms. Raskin until we get some answers to our questions. I yield the floor.